Are you ready to practice your engineering skills? Are you good at following written instructions like a recipe? Would you like to build something aerodynamic that goes faster than the eye can see? Do you think you can apply your artistic skills to create a meaningful rocket design? Welcome to this video series explaining how to build your Alpha rocket. To get the best results, it's important to take your time. So plan on pausing the video at times because I'm not going to give you enough time to complete each step. Some steps will require hours of time for gluing and paint to dry, so you want to make sure that you have planned your time and have a safe space to keep your materials and tools between steps. And since you'll be using sandpaper and glue, make sure you have an appropriate location for that kind of mess. In total, it's probably going to take you about 2 days to build the basic rocket. For painting, expect another day and a half to complete, because some types of paints must dry overnight before the next step. Of course, painting should be done outside. In this first segment, we're going to explain a little bit about the tools you'll need and the parts that are in your rocket kit. Your name should be on the kits with a number. That is your rocket number we will use for tracking performance and judging. We have provided most of what you need in the kits. However, there are a few items that you'll need to provide. So you'll need to provide a scissor, a pencil, a couple bottles of water, that's to hold the rocket when you're doing part of a build, and paper towels to clean up. So set that over to the side. With your rocket kit, this just slides open. There we go. We've included sandpaper and a sanding block, a measuring guide with 1/8 increments here. So 3 marks would be 3/8 of an inch. A couple rubber bands to use around your water bottles or whatever. A couple Q-tips to clean up around the fins of the rocket when you're doing some gluing. Of course, with the glue, we have this blue tape, about 6 feet of blue tape for masking tape that you can use when you're doing your finishing, your painting or whatever. The outer bag will be important for you to keep, because you're going to use that to return everything back to the classroom on launch day, including your rocket. So don't lose that. Now take your scissor, and we're going to open up our rocket bag. I've already opened this one, but notice that I've got it on the very top to keep the bag intact so we can use it to continue to store the parts. Now the first thing I want to do is pull out the instructions, and there's 2 sets of instructions. One of them is in English, and one of them is German or whatever. I'll just take this other one that's in the foreign language and use it as paper to protect my work surface. So as we open up our instructions, you notice page 1 has an inventory of the parts, so we're going to go through that in just a minute. And then we have page 2, and it folds out to 3, 4, 5, 6. Notice that the steps are not numbered, so you have to go by the page number so you don't lose track of where you are. Okay, let's take a look at the rocket here. I want to go through the parts. First of all, we have the nose cone. Nose cone is loose in your rocket because it has to fly out at the end of the flight. The parachute, of course, is hooked to the nose cone, and the nose cone is hooked to the rocket via what we call a shock cord. It's a long rubber band that's glued to the inside of the rocket body itself. Next down the line, we have this wadding, we call it. It's basically a fireproof paper that protects the parachute during the launch from the rocket motor in the back. Then we have this thing called the engine mount. Instead of blue, yours is going to be white because they changed the color there. But the engine mount basically holds the motor, which you don't have yet. You'll get that on launch day, and it just clips right in there securely and has a couple wires hanging out of the igniters to ignite it off. And then on the side of the rocket we have the launch lug, and this launch lug is used to guide the rocket up a rod at the beginning of the flight so it stays straight. Okay, so we take the parts out of the rocket kit here, and they're all numbered, or actually they're lettered here on this page, so we'll go through an inventory. First of all, we have the engine mount, which is A, that's that white piece there. B is that metal piece, which is the engine hook, that's inside the bag here. C is the adapter ring, it's green, and that will go around in a later step around your engine mount. D is the parachute, which is orange. E is the body of the rocket itself. F are the fins and balsa wood. Be careful of that. That'll be part of our first step we'll do here in just a minute. G is the nose cone, and I've already removed the lug on most of the rockets there, but make sure that you don't break this eyelet around here because that's what everything attaches to. H, that's that long rubber band, which we call a shock cord, and that's inside the bag here. And then I is the launch lug, which is easy to lose. It's a little bitty straw there. You can always cut another straw if you lose it, but just be aware that's easy to lose. So that is the contents of our rocket kit. So let's jump right into the build on page 2. I'm going to open that up here. Page 2 at the top has some marking guides. We're going to come back to that later. Those will be cut out and used as part of your rocket and rocket build. But the first step is the fins. And notice in the instructions there, they have you take sandpaper and a sanding block and basically sand the fins smooth before you separate them. So I'm just going to lightly sand. And if you paint, that'll help you later on. Do the other side. There we go. We're in good shape there. I'll put that aside, block aside for now. And then the instructions have you use a knife to take the fins apart. But I find that the balsa wood, which is very fragile, is easy to take these out just by bending them slightly. So just ever so slightly. You can take these out as they've already scored it for you. And what we're going to be left with here is 3 fins. And I'm going to take this, because actually they have you use these later on. I'm just going to put it back into my bag and set that aside. So now we're left with 3 fins. Notice each of the fins has a little hole on one end. That hole on that one side there is called the root edge. The root edge is the side or the end that will actually glue to your rocket. That's why they're careful to mark that, because each side is a little bit different length. So the first thing that we need to do is flatten that out, because of course if we're going to glue that to a flat surface on the side of your rocket, that needs to be perfectly flat. So the way I do that is I just pull it across your sandpaper that's laid flat down on the surface until it is smooth, and I think I got it smooth. Okay, the next thing you want to do is notice that all the sides there, have these little nubs. So I'll just lightly sand these nubs off these other sides of the fin to make sure that they're all gone. There we go. This one needs a little bit more work. Make sure it's off. You don't want to take too much off, because if you sand it to where it changes the shape of the fin itself, you can really wind up in a problem during the launch where it goes off at an angle and not straight up into the air. So you can make these fins a little bit more aerodynamic by rounding over the leading edge of the fin a little bit, so it slices through the air a little bit better. The leading edge is the longest edge, right next to the wing root. So this edge right here, we can carefully round that over. Don't have to be too much. Just round each of them over just slightly. Okay? That looks good. They suggest that you can do the outer one. Not really necessary. This is the important one there. So I'm going to round this one, the longest edge. Remember, this wood is kind of fragile, so don't put too much pressure on it. Let the sandpaper do all the work. Okay, and the last one. So there we go. We have 3 fins that will be ready to mount on our rocket body. Make sure that's completely flat. Okay. In our next segment, we're going to be building the engine mount, which looks something like this, with some marks and some glue. So we'll take a break right now and come back and do that. Welcome back. In this second segment of the Alpha Rocket building project, we will build the engine mount and then glue the fins onto the rocket. This process will be over an hour or so, so you'll want to pause the video to complete each step as we go along. You'll need your scissors, a measuring guide, glue, the blue tape, rubber bands, the water bottle, paper towel, the Q-tips, and of course you're going to need the engine mount, the adapter ring, and the engine hook, which is inside here. Let's take that engine hook out now. What I do is, rather than opening up the whole bag, I just pierce the bag with the hook itself and then slide it out easily like this, so I don't have to take all that other stuff out. And we'll just set that aside. So here's the engine hook. Now we're going to take, as it shows on page 2 of our instructions, we're going to take our engine mount and the measuring guide and hold that up. You'll notice on most of you on the measuring guide, you already have a slit at the 2.5 inch mark. And when we line that up to 2.5 inches, it also says that it wants us to put a mark at 3/8 of an inch from the bottom of the tube. So 3 marks there, because they're 1/8 inch marks. I'm going to mark that. And then I'm going to mark another one at 1 inch. And of course, 2.5 inches is already marked for me because I have a slit already in my tube. So we'll go ahead and do that. If you don't have a slit in your tube, what they recommend is use a X-Acto knife. And of course, be very careful with something like this. Use a knife and then you just pierce that as shown in the instructions there. and it only needs to be as wide as the metal part. So it's about 1/8 of an inch wide. Okay, put that away. Now the next thing it asks you to do there is to take your engine hook, put that into the slit, and then it hangs down past the bottom. And the next thing we do is take our adapter ring, and sometimes it's hard to do, but you kind of have to, because it's a very tight fit, you have to wiggle that on and slide it down just short of the 1-inch mark. And it can be kind of hard to slide, so I use my finger in there to keep from bending the tube. Now, once you're there, you want to take your glue and glue all the way around the ring. And slide the adapter ring up over that glue. It'll be hard to do, but get it on the 1-inch mark or thereabouts. And of course, make a mess. Now, after you have it on that point, put glue on the other side. And that'll hold it in place. The full force of the engine, when it fires off, will be on that joint, because that holds the engine to the rocket itself. Okay, so that just gets set aside, and we will come back to that in a later step. Next, we're going to work on our rocket fins. Before we attach the fins, we need to mark where they're actually going to go on the tube. So now what we have to do is cut out this part of the instructions, which is your basically marking guide. So I'm going to grab my pulling instructions here, grab my scissor, and cut that guide out on the outside of it. So basically I have the guide cut out, and basically what it shows you to do is go to the bottom of the tube, and we're going to call this the bottom of our tube, and we're going to wrap this guide around and tape it. And it's going to be a little bit off from the bottom there. So I'm going to take a little bit of tape, a couple pieces. One piece of tape is going to be used to hold the guide together, lined up, those marks lined up. And then another piece of tape is going to hold it to the rocket body. That blue tape will come off the rocket body real easy when it's time. Now I'm going to mark the fin lines, where the fins are going to go, and then there's a fourth line called the launch lug. So I'm going to start with the launch lug, and I'm going to draw that line on both sides where the arrow is, and this launch lug I'm going to label LL so I don't mix it up with the fin lines. And then I'm going to go back and hit all the fin lines. There's 3 fins, so there's 6 marks I need to make. And there we go. So There we have our fin lines marked. I can now take this off. The instructions tell you to take this over to a door frame, but instead of using a door frame, I have a different way to do it. We're going to use this marking guide that I provided for you, and we're going to mark the fins with that. It operates just like a door jamb would, and it helps you draw a straight line. So I'm going to draw a straight line, and that has to be visible because you're going to be putting glue on it and you're going to be putting your fins on it. So make sure that that's dark enough. Here's your next one. Now your launch lug has to be a little bit longer. They recommend about 4 inches long. So I'm going to go to the launch lug and I'm going to draw a longer line here because the launch lug, as you recall, is higher up the rocket than the fins. And here's my last. I'm not worried about the smearing of the ink because that's going to be painted over. Okay, so now I have 4 lines. Okay, the next step now is to glue the fins on. In order to do that, we're going to need our 2 water bottles. We're going to want to make sure that the water bottles are tied together or put together by rubber bands. We're going to lay those over. And we're going to put the rocket body underneath the rubber band. We're just going to tack these fins on, and each one is going to take quite a while to do, and then we're going to come back and reinforce them. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to take the glue and I'm going to make a very thin line of glue. We don't want it dripping off down the fin. And then I'm going to wipe it with my finger, and then I'm going to wipe some glue on this mark that we have here. And believe it or not, I'm just going to let it sit here for about a minute. The thinner the glue is, the quicker it'll dry. And then the next step, after it has a chance to dry a little bit, will be to put a little bit more glue on the fin and then attach it to the rocket itself. And all this does is temporarily tack the fin onto the rocket. We will come back later and reinforce it. Make sure everything is level. And I walk the back end up towards the top along that line, and I align it as best as I can on that mark. We make sure it is straight as could be. Okay, I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to come back in about 5 minutes, and we're going to do the next one. Okay, about 5 minutes has passed since we tacked this one on. Now I'm going to roll it over ever so gently to where the next line is. And we're going to do the same thing. Make sure that I have the side with the hole on it, the root. Just an ever thin bit of glue. And I'm going to take some of that glue. I'm going to put it on the line. I'm going to let this set up for about a minute. Very thin. Thinner it is, the faster it'll dry. Okay, one is pretty much done. Now I'm ready to rock this on there and make sure that it's perfectly straight in the mount there, the water bottle mount. Start from the back end, right on the mark, and go to the front. Line it up. Keep it straight. Okay, I'm going to let that sit for about 5 minutes. And I'll have you go ahead and do the last one on your own, and then we'll come back and put the Launch Lug on. Well, at this point, you should have all 3 fins tacked onto your rocket, and we'll be ready shortly to put the Launch Lug on. But the fins are just tacked on. They're not secure yet. So what we need to do is add what they call fillets, which is basically a little bit of reinforcement on each side of the fins. And to do this, all you have to do is just put a, again, very small amount of glue on each side of the fins. And we call this a fillet. And of course, be very careful because your fins are just tacked on. If they do come off, not a big problem. You just go back, put it back on, tack it on, and use the same procedure. Okay, so we got those 2 done. Turn it around. Do the other 2. Again, we call this fillets. That they also have that on the wing root of an airplane. Fillets. And it not only, in this case, strengthens our rocket, it also adds a little bit of aerodynamic to the rocket as well. And last one. Now this glue will dry clear. It'll provide a nice foundation for your fins, and they'll be a lot stronger. Okay, now we have the Launch Lug. The way I get the Launch Lug out there is I just grab my scissor, cut the corner of the bag and let it come out. And you'll notice I don't always do this, but I'm going to do it this time. They recommend in the instructions on page 3 to give it a very light sanding on the one side that's going to be attached to the rocket body. So we'll go ahead and sand that one area. And I'll put a small amount of glue again to the Launch Lug. It's very important not to put any glue inside the lug itself. And the reason is you don't want it to bind on the rod during the launch, or that'll be disastrous. It'll never launch. So I mount it above the fins slightly, and I make sure it is extremely straight because we do not want it to come off the launch pad at an angle. Now that is very small compared to a fin, so adding the fillet to the side can be done pretty quickly. Don't have to have it set for a long period of time. Of course, I twist it a little bit, and then I'll go to the other side. When it's not dried and tacked on, it's a little slippery, obviously. Get my dry Q-tip here. Clean it up. Okay, so now I'm going to let this, in my case, I'm going to let this sit overnight before I come back to it and let all this dry securely. Make sure that it's in a good spot so any animals like cats or dogs don't get to it. And we'll be ready for the next step tomorrow. Thank you. Welcome back. In this segment, we're going to install the engine mount assembly and the shock cord to the rocket. First of all, you want to take a Q-tip, or as the instructions suggest, part of the balsa wood that you broke off the fins earlier, and you want to measure off about 1.5 inches and hold your finger here, and what that'll do, it'll give you 1.5 inches when you stick the Q-tip into the rocket body. You won't go any further than that, and you'll go about what it's asking, 1.5 inches in. So we take our glue, put a good amount of glue on the Q-tip and keep rolling it around. This is an important part of the rocket that we want to make sure is completely secure. So sticking it in, a little bit of mess there, 1.5 inches in, and I'm going to swirl it all around. I am going to put a little bit more on here just to make sure I have enough, and stick it in 1.5 inches again. Okay, we're good on that. Now the next thing I want to do is pick up the engine mount assembly, and I want to align the metal piece with the launch lug. So the motor clip or engine clip is going to be lined up, and I'm going to go to the 3/8 inch mark that I had in the rocket. So the rocket engine will stick out approximately 3/8 of an inch below the rocket. And that's all there is for that particular step. Next, we're going to install the shock cord. Using the instructions at the top of page 4, it says that we should cut out the shock cord template or mount. And that's at the top of page 2, right next to the other template that we cut out. So I'm going to cut that out. And we're not going to cut on the dotted lines, just on the solid lines around it. So we're left with this piece right here. Next, we're going to get our shock cord out. I'll put that back into my rocket packet. And that's the big rubber band in there. And I'll cut the bag all the way open now. And inside the bag is the parachute in a bag and the shock cord. To start it off and make it easy, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and fold these over on the dotted line as it's depicted in the picture. So I'll fold 1 over 2, make a crease there, and 2 over 3 and make a crease there. Now, time to put a little glue. So what I'm going to do is put a nice dab of glue on the tube, and I'm going to go ahead and put it on the 3 already. So we have 2 daubs of glue there. That's more than enough. And then I'm going to lay one end of the shock cord all the way across the glue. Lay that down, and then I'm going to fold 1 over on top of the 2, and then now I'm going to fold 2 over on top, and it squishes out of the side. And I want to hold this for a minute. A little bit messy here, but I have our paper towel. Now the next thing that we have to do is we have to put this shock cord mount inside the rocket body. I'm going to turn our rocket around, and I'm going to put glue on this side of the mount. Probably put a little bit too much there. No problem. Just take a little bit off, smear it around. So now I'm going to reach way in, as far as I can reach with my fat fingers here, and get it at least 1.5 inches down. And it's way in there now. So it's about right here inside the rocket. And to make it a little bit easier, what I'll do is I'll take a pencil and I'll roll it around in there to make sure it's secure up against the wall. It needs to be up against the wall to be out of the way of our parachute as it slides in. Okay. Let me wipe up any mess that I made. And that's it. Next, we're going to talk about finishing the rocket when we come back. But we're going to take a break now. I'm going to let this dry, and then we'll be ready for the next step. Welcome back. Painting can be one of the most difficult parts of building a rocket. I'm showing you on the screen what cadets have done in the past. You can see there's all kinds of different designs that people have come up with. Some classes have a theme that they build towards and design. But even if you don't have the opportunity for some reason to paint your rocket, the way the rocket is built is fine for a launch. So anyway, let me get right into what I'm doing. I decided that I'm going to build my rocket similar to the design here in our instructions, except the fin, instead of being red, is going to be blue. I'm going to use a spray paint. Other paints are fine, but this is what I happen to have. I have a white paint that happens to be a primer also. Primers are used when you're worried about the paint sticking to various surfaces like plastic, a waxy surface, or a surface that is very porous. But anyway, that's just a little precaution. Now, on my nose cone, it has a little seam on 2 sides here. And to get rid of that, I can use sandpaper, but I find it just as easy to use a scissor scrape that seam down. There it is. And that should take care of it. In fact, I just did. The other thing about the nose cone, there may be a nub that's still in there. I used a special tool, and I hopefully did it to all the rockets this year. But what they say in the instructions is that you take a X-Acto knife or a hobby knife and you slice it very carefully without breaking the eyelet. That's very important that you don't break that. So, to protect this part of the rocket from getting paint on it so it fits inside here without getting stuck, what I do is I take a piece of tape, masking tape, blue masking tape that's around your glue bottle, and I tape that off. And now I don't have to worry about the nose cone getting jammed from paint on the nose cone. To paint the nose cone, what I do is I hang it. With the spray paint, it does rock a little bit when I hang it, but it should be stable enough because it's so small. So the way I do that is I take another piece of tape, and on the sticky side, I put another piece of tape with its sticky side down, and I create a loop that I can put on the nose cone, go all the way around, and that loop will hold it, and I'll show you how I hang it later on. For the body, what I worry about is paint getting inside here. So what I need to do is I roll this up, and I put the end of it in last so it doesn't fall all the way through to the other side of the rocket. So I shove that down in there. So I take a couple pieces of tape and I stick it in the nose cone, or where the nose cone fits. And then I take a loop, just like I did before, and I stick that in here as well. And that finishes sealing that whole area off in there. So now I have a loop. Now I want a little bit more control than a swinging rocket when I paint it. So what I'm going to do is I got a stick that I'm going to put in here. And the way I do that is I get a hanger, pant hanger, and I'll use this. I've already taken one off here. I'm going to stick it into the rocket and go up about halfway. And now I'm going to take some tape and I'm going to protect the rocket this way. Okay, and then I can hold it. I'm going to put a little bit more tape on here while you watch the Rocket Man from Apogee Rockets explain how to paint a rocket with spray paint. So go ahead and watch that, and I'll take care of this. Okay, now that the rocket is wet with paint, the way I take care of that is I use the hanger, bend it around a little bit, and I hang one side of the rocket on here and the nose cone over there, and then I find a place to hang this outside and let it dry between coats. So, we're going to come back in the next segment and talk about, after this is completely dry with the coats of white paint, how to tape it off so I can paint one of the fins blue. Welcome back. Well, I have put 4 coats of paint, white paint, on my rocket. I took some steel wool and kind of sanded it off after my second coat. Your kit may have some steel wool in it, not all of them will. But now I'm ready to tape it off because you remember I wanted to make one fin blue. So the way I do that is I grab some tape that we had provided for you, and I carefully line it up with the side of the fin to mask that area off. So both sides. And of course, I don't want to forget about the top part here. To protect the tube, I took a part of that instructions I didn't need, and I'm going to tape that around the rest of the tube, and then tape that again around all the fin area here to protect that. Now, to protect the other fins, I'll just take a couple sheets of paper, and that's ready now to paint my blue color. Well, I put 2 coats of paint on the fin, and I'm ready to start taking the tape off and revealing how that part of the rocket turned out. And now that I've got all the painting done around the rocket tube, I need to take my number, my rocket number, and write it on the inside of the tube. My rocket number, as I go to the bag, is 00. So we want you to write that. So we can refer to it, and then put your initials. So make sure you got your initials in there as well as your rocket number written in there. Okay, and then the next thing, I have my nose cone. And I need to make sure that it fits in the rocket body smoothly, and it does. Next, I will put the decals on, but the paint finish turned out pretty good. The steel wool, very fine steel wool, kind of knocked down some of the rough spots after my second white coat, and then I put 2 more coats on. Only needed 2 coats for the fin there. I could have gotten by with 1, but looks pretty good. Now that the rocket is complete as far as the finish, it's time to get it ready for launch by installing the parachute and the shock cord. So, I'm going to pull out the shock cord here, and we'll get our last piece out of the rocket kit. Remember, we put everything back in the kit to bring back for launch day. And here's our parachute. They've already taken the lines and secured them for us. So we basically have 3 lines connecting to the parachute on both ends for 6 lines total. So I'm going to stretch that out, and then at the very end here, after it's stretched out and I know I've got the very end, I'm going to create a loop. And that loop I'm going to pass through the eyelet of my nose cone, keeping all 3 loops together. I'm just going to pass the nose cone through the loops and then tighten it all up where it swings around and lines up on the very bottom of the eyelid on the nose cone. And then next, I'm going to take the other end of my shock cord and give that 2 knots and cut off the excess. Knot number 1, make that tight, and knot number 2. There we go. Make sure it's all tight. Now, on launch day, we will give you this wadding material. Looks like 2 brown pieces of toilet paper, but I'm going to wad that up just as demonstration here today and show you how that will go on launch day. We'll just go ahead and stick that in, and that'll go all the way down to protect the parachute from melting when it's blown out. Now the parachute, I'm going to go ahead and roll that up. First fold it over, then roll it up, and they suggest in the instructions like a cigar, because it's kind of loosely rolled up here, and I leave enough line to get through, and then I put the shock cord down into the rocket body and push that down with the parachute, and then the nose cone. Now it is time to prepare the rocket motor to stick into the rocket itself. On launch day, this will probably be prepared for you, but we're going to be using an A83 motor. A standing for the total power that this motor has. A B has twice as much power. A C has 4 times as much power as this motor, but we're going to be using an A. 8 stands for how quickly that power is used. So the higher the number, the quicker it burns off, which means the faster it launches, but the sooner it burns out. So a lower number would go slower off the pad. And then there's a period of time after the burn is complete that the motor will smoke a little bit. When it's done smoking, and in this rocket it's 3 seconds, then there'll be a charge that instead of burning through the nozzle on the launch, it'll burn out the top of the rocket motor, which will push out the parachute and the nose cone for recovery. To fire off the rocket, we have an igniter, which basically is 2 wires, and at the end of those 2 wires is like a match. We can apply a little bit of power to this just to make sure the wires are hooked up properly, the continuity check. Or if we apply 3 times as much power, in our case, it'll start the match to burn off and light the rocket motor. So we stick that in there until it's down as far as it'll go. We'll curve that over a little bit, and then I'll stick the plug that comes with it into the motor itself. When we stick it into the rocket, the bottom of the rocket, we want to make sure that those wires are on each side of a fin. And we put it opposite the launch lug, so it'll be on the launch pad like this, and your motor will be stuck in, clipped in, won't go any further because the clip keeps it from going further. And then we have a wire on each side of that opposing fin from the launch lug. On launch day, we'll give you wadding and your motor to insert into your rocket. You'll place it on the rail on the launch pad, and we'll connect the wires for you. The controller is located about 15 feet from the stand. You can see it in the background. We will insert a key into the controller for you. Light will come on indicating that it's wired properly, and then you will next announce your rocket number and do a countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Press the button. Give it enough time to heat up the igniter. When you see smoke, you can release.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Where'd it go? Well, that concludes our rocket project. I hope you had a good time putting your rocket together, and we'll see you at the launch site. Let's take a minute to watch some other rockets launch.